On Wednesday, April 10th, 1912, RMS Titanic, the largest liner in the world, leaves Southampton, England on her maiden voyage, making the transatlantic run to New York City in the United States. She makes brief stops in Cherbourg, France and Queenstown, Ireland to pick up additional passengers and crew, bringing the total aboard to 2,240. During the following 4 days, the seas are calm and the skies are clear, as Titanic's passengers delight in all the most luxurious ship in the world has to offer. Suddenly everything changes on Sunday, April 14th at 11:40 p.m. when Titanic strikes a giant iceberg. Her hull is pierced below the waterline in 5 of her forward compartments. The damage is spread over the first 300 feet of Titanic's starboard side. Amazingly, the total area opened up to the sea is only 12 square feet. But spread out over the 5 compartments, it's enough to seal Titanic's fate. As the compartments flood, the weight of the water will take her down by the bow, and like a giant ice cube tray, the water will fill compartment to compartment, and Titanic will sink. It's now 1:40 a.m., 2 hours after the collision, and the situation on Titanic has become critical. Titanic's first officer, William Murdoch, and second officer, Charles Lightoller, have been struggling to load and launch Titanic's lifeboats. At first, many of the passengers were reluctant to leave what seemed like the warm, safe security of the ship. But now, everyone aboard is aware that Titanic is sinking. The remaining boats are being filled to their capacity. On the starboard side, First Officer Murdoch is generally loading everyone he can into the boats, while to port, Second Officer Lightoller is strictly loading women and children only. But time is running out. Inside the wireless room, Chief Operator Jack Phillips is working feverishly, updating Titanic's situation to various ships he's made contact with. One of those ships, a Cunard liner, the SS Carpathia, is the closest to Titanic, and her captain, Arthur H. Rostron, has her headed full steam through the dangerous ice toward Titanic's location. Carpathia has informed Phillips that it will be 3 hours until they arrive. The power to Phillips' wireless set is fading fast, but he is determined to remain at his post until the end. Deep down below, Titanic's stokers and electrical engineers have also remained at their stations, fighting the rising water, determined to keep the pumps and electrical power going until the last possible moment. It's now after 2 a.m. and the end is near. All of the boats are away except 2 collapsibles which are secured on top of the officers' quarters just behind the bridge. Murdoch and Lightoller are working frantically against the rising water, trying to get the collapsibles free and ready to launch. Suddenly, and without warning, Titanic's bow plunges rapidly, and a tidal wave of water surges over the bridge, washing passengers and crew alike into the ice-cold sea. Second Officer Charles Lightoller recalls those final horrific moments as Titanic makes her death dive to the bottom of the Atlantic, more than 2 miles down.
Then came the very last boat of all, and it was a sort of raft with collapsible canvas sides, stowed upside down on top of the officers' quarters, and that's above the boat deck. A seaman named Hemming, he'd been with me in many of the mail boats, he and I cut this one adrift and threw it down on the water, which was now about 2 feet above the boat deck. Hemming, by the way, had earlier on given up his place in the boat after being told off to take charge of it, and unbeknown to me, had followed round, helping me with the lowering. ticklish job even in daylight. Having dumped this collapsible, there was not a thing further we could do on that side, so both of us went over to the starboard side. But we found all the boats were away from there too. Of course, there were still hundreds of people round. As Hemming and I looked down from the top of the officers' quarters, where we were standing, the ship took a sudden dip, and a sea came rolling up, carrying everyone with it. Many were drowned there and then. Everyone that could just instinctively started to scramble up towards the after end of the ship. But that was only putting it off. In fact, it was lessening their chances. The plunge had to come, and that I could see was pretty soon. And no one's chances were going to be improved by getting mixed up in a struggling mass. Hemming, as I found out afterwards, headed for one of the after boat falls, slid down, dropped into the water, swam away, and was eventually saved. For my part, I turned forward and took a header from the top of the wheelhouse. I started to swim away, but got sucked down 2 or 3 times. In fact, I got mighty near the edge of things before I finally came up alongside the collapsible. We'd hove into the water from the top of the officers' quarters, and there I hung on. A bit later, the forward funnel guys carried away, and the funnel, weighing perhaps 50 or 60 tons, fell down with a crash on the water. It missed the raft and some of us hanging onto it, by inches. But there were a good many it didn't miss. Next thing I remember, I was still hanging on to a bit of rope attached to the raft, but some 30 or 40 yards away from the ship. The wash of the falling funnel had evidently picked us up, raft and all, and flung us clear of the ship altogether. Several of us scrambled up onto the slippery bottom of the raft, and it was from there I saw the Titanic sink. As I watched, I could see her bow getting deeper and deeper in the water, with the foremast sticking up above the surface, whilst her stern lifted higher and higher, till it was right out of the water. When she got to an angle of about 60 degrees, there was a sullen sort of rumbling roar, as her massive boilers all left their beds and went crashing down through the bulk's heads and everything that stood in their way. Up to that moment, she had stood out as clear with her rows of electric lights all burning. When the boilers broke away, she was, of course, plunged into absolute darkness, though her huge black outline was still perfectly distinct up against the stars and sky. Slowly she reared up on end, till at last she was absolutely perpendicular. Then, quite quietly, but quicker and quicker, she seemed just to slide away under the surface and disappear. As she vanished, everyone round me on the upturned boat, as though they could hardly believe it, just said, "She's gone." Some little time later, I found that the senior wireless operator was standing just behind me, and from the wireless messages he told me he'd received from different ships, I figured up in my mind that the Cunard liner Carpathia, one that he said was coming to our rescue, should be up about daylight. It was then I first heard of the Masaba message, and when I said I didn't remember it, he told me he'd put it under a paperweight at his elbow and never sent it to the bridge. Many died from cold during the night, the wireless operator amongst them, and a mighty long time it seemed before daylight broke, standing wet through and up to our knees in icy water on that upturned boat. Frankly, I don't think many of us expected to see daylight. At one time during the night, someone suggested we should say Our Father, and I don't think it was exactly scare that made everyone join in. But you'd need to be in somewhat the same fix, where a couple of minutes may mean all the difference between, well, here and hereafter. to understand the feeling we put into it. I've heard that prayer ever since I was the height of 6 penitent cockers, but never with such intense earnestness as the surroundings lent to it that night.
Unknown to Lightoller, as Titanic went down, she in fact split in two, somewhere between the third and fourth funnels, the bow section breaking away, while the stern remained afloat for a few short minutes, until it too sank beneath the waves, taking more than 1,500 passengers and crew with her. No one knows for certain what happened to Captain Smith as he went down with his ship. Perhaps he retired to the bridge or his cabin during the final minutes, his heart and mind heavy with blame and the burden of sorrow and loss that was to come. Thomas Andrews, the ship's designer, was also lost, having last been seen standing in the ship's lounge, near the painting that hung there depicting the entrance to Plymouth Harbor. He was deep in thought with no apparent intent to save his own life. For the survivors suddenly alone in the lifeboats adrift on an empty sea, they would have to wait through the long cold night until the dawn for the salvation that they hoped would arrive.